pretty much my whole life. I just
Live.
assumed.
Says live.
Yes, it's the story of my
Okay,
life, Michael.
so
I just assume that everybody's enjoying my company, whether they are or they're not.
yes, right, Ed, center of the universe, Martinez. So
That's right.
give me just one moment here to acclimate, and God, I gotta slide over this way. There we go. So let me welcome everybody to episode number 20 of At Your Service with Haber and Martinez. After our first episode, if you had told me we'd be 20 in, I'm not so sure I'd believe you. But here we are, nonetheless, in the flesh. And we're
by the way,
joined today
Michael,
by
a lot of people like the show. A lot of people are telling me on the street I went and rode with my brothers, because I ride Harleys. I'm in a motorcycle club. And two of my brothers were like, hey, I haven't seen a show.
Wild
lately.
Hogs. All right, stop yammering and let me introduce our guest. Okay, it's not about you, Martinez. So, as you all can see, there's three of us today. We're very lucky to have what I would call a very busy dude, a very smart dude, and a very handsome dude. Mark E. Stein with us. Mark is an intellectual property lawyer. He's got a big brain, and he handles very serious and interesting cases, primarily in the civil realm, also in the administrative realm. We're very lucky to have him with us today. As I said, he's a very busy guy. He's made time to share some of his expertise with us and to try and talk to you folks about the intersection between intellectual property law and criminal law. And believe it or not, there's more intersections than one would think. As I was researching the topic, I have literally pages and pages and pages of handwritten notes that I took, and it's very difficult to kind of consolidate this into an hour, but I'm sure that we'll be able to give you at least some good pointers and interesting anecdotes during that time. So with that said, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. We're happy to have you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I got a first question I got to ask. Just tell us even I, as a lawyer, when I went to the law school, I remember the first word I heard was intellectual. And I thought, well, that's not for me. So I just backed off from intellectual property. Explain to everybody in layman's terms, simple terms, what does an intellectual property attorney do?
So really four areas. Patents, which we won't talk a lot about because if you really want to bore an audience, start with patents. Trademarks, which everyone pretty much knows what they are intellectually because, well, Michael's wearing one right now and you probably have a lot in front of you. It's any kind of logo, any kind of brand. Copyrights, which is one of the places where there's actually more some intersection between criminal law and, well, there's in trademark too, between criminal law and IP, and then computer and internet. And under trademark is also where trade secrets falls. Under internet is also where all the fun things like rights of privacy, cybersecurity. There's a lot of topics. It's blockchain. There's all these fun things that fall under that category. That could be hours and hours by itself.
Let me follow up on Ed's question and ask you another lay question. Why should anybody care? Why should anyone care about intellectual property?
Well, there's a lot of reasons you should care. I mean, first of all, what's more American than, people earning from the sweat of their brow and being able to protect that? So someone that builds a brand, and I understand that we all look at Nike and we think, wow, well, why do I care about Nike? Why do I want to help Nike? Well, not so many years ago in our lifetime, Phil Knight couldn't even sell sneakers. He literally had this little tiny company out on the west coast of the country, and he barely sold anything. So first of all, the first reason you should care is we should respect what this country is built on, capitalism, and someone builds something up themselves, they ought to be able to protect it. The second reason is it affects all of you in a lot of different ways, and I'll give you the simplest example. So take the example of a counterfeit product. We'll make it life or death because it's more, it seems more like.
Use the example that you and I discussed and that I plugged today. I'll just give it to you very briefly.
Oh no, the heart valve. Yeah, heart valve. Yeah,
exactly, the heart valve.
So look, in China you get anything manufactured, literally anything. So imagine, your father's going in for surgery for heart valve replacement surgery. He goes in, they do a successful operation. Of course, the surgeon installs a heart valve that the hospital got from what they thought was a legitimate source. And it turns out your father dies 2 days later because it turned out the heart valve wasn't from a legitimate source. It was actually a counterfeit product made in China. And now good luck. Now you sue the hospital, but obviously you don't want that to happen to someone else. And it's very hard. And I could give examples with baby formula, brake pads. And then a third reason you ought to care is that there's a lot of links between, particularly in trademark counterfeiting, between counterfeit products and organized crime and terrorism. I mean, look, listen, it's just like for you guys, the street crack seller. I mean, he obviously is not making crack. I mean, he's not the mastermind manufacturing the boatloads of meth or crack. I mean, the same way, the people selling the counterfeit purses, they're not the ones making them. Somebody's making, millions and millions of units, and that typically are people that are tied to criminal organized crime, tied to terrorism. So you ought to care because you buy that counterfeit purse. Guess what? You might be funding some crazy blowing something up.
Right.
And you know what's interesting is not only should we care for those reasons, but that's one of the primary reasons that the government cares, right? So we're going to, part of our dovetail.
Going back to the heart valve, you can't sue the manufacturer of what would have been the real heart valve because their defense is going to be, hey, sorry, man, that wasn't mine. So now you're stuck with trying to find out who in China built some counterfeit heart valve and then seeing if you can sue them. I'm assuming, right, Mark?
Well, it's actually more complicated. So remember, we're now not even including what's affectionately known as the gray market. So, the gray market is a market of mostly legitimate products, but also counterfeit products. So, the simplest way to explain what happens in the gray market is, here we did Nike already, so take Apple. So Apple has an exclusive distributorship with a company located in the Dominican Republic. And those goods get diverted from the Dominican Republic to, let's say, the US, Canada, somewhere. Now, a lot of times these diverters buy in bulk from a lot of different places. In fact, many years ago, I had a case that we represented Albertsons, but every major retailer had been sued by a hair care company, TG, which makes like teeny bopper kind of hair care products, because the diverters had bought all these different lots of TG hair care products and mixed in with them were these counterfeit products that had bacterial contamination in them. And they ended up on store shelves of Albertsons, Walmart, Target. So we were in this massive lawsuit as well. And we went to one of the main diverters who was basically like, well, there's like 60 lots mixed together in here. I can't separate them out because they buy these things in bulk. So, right, there's no way to trace it back. It's impossible to trace back. And even if you could, what are you going to do? You going to China to sue? Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. They'll laugh at you.
And you also have, wouldn't you also have another issue in terms of the damages to the company itself, right? Because you do have a legitimate company that's making a legitimate product, and now all of a sudden they're taking a reputational hit because of some black market product.
Yeah, but they also are limited in, let's say that this company manufactures, and we've all discovered with COVID how the supply chain is so interlinked. Let's say that part of this heart valve is actually manufactured in China. And let's say that the counterfeit product somehow emanated from one of the companies they deal with in China. So they go back to China. So, okay, they cease the relationship with that distributor, but enforcing intellectual property rights, enforcing patent or trademark rights in countries like China is very difficult. And look, that's one of the first rules of thumb. For anyone who does business outside the US, if you want to enforce your rights, if you're in a developed country like the US, the UK, Israel, Japan, you're going to have good enforcement. If you're in the second or third world, the third world, good luck. Good luck enforcing it in Vietnam or enforcing it in Bangladesh but even in India or Brazil or China and Russia, you really feel like you're going to get a fair shake in that court system. You really feel like that Russian judge is like, yeah, let's help this American company out.
Especially Michael with that beard and that face. They're not even going to let him in the courtroom looking like that.
And remember,
you're Ruski.
Remember,
I'm like strong like ox.
Remember, we're also living in a very connected world. And if COVID taught everyone one thing, it's that, wow, this world is interconnected, especially economically, in very, in very crazy ways. And ultimately what I do, most of these are economic crimes, but they have huge implications for the general society at large.
Got it.
What about stuff like identity theft and different types of scams that we find that occur on the computer? And I guess they would fall under a category of I guess computer crime. But you've got things like these phishings, email scams, car warranty scams. I get them all the time where I get a notice purporting to be from Netflix to reset my account, click here, or from my bank that there's been a hold placed on it, click here, credit card companies. And, some of these things look pretty damn good. If you're not intelligent.
All the emails you get about escorts, but that's a story about it for another time.
Some of these things look very legitimate, right? And I would be lying if I told you early on I hadn't been caught myself, by mistakenly clicking. Obviously, it's one of those things like falling off a bicycle or sticking your finger into a, hot water. You'll learn pretty quick. But, would this also fall into your ballywhack in any way, shape, or form, these types of things?
So, you're talking about a very broad spectrum. So yes and no. So, look, unfortunately, the simple answer is that people need to exercise a little more self-restraint and common sense. So I always laugh about, I know when certain emails have made their rounds around to the older generations, they come back to me. So you've probably gotten the email about Bill Gates giving away his fortune a number of times over the years. Probably gotten that email. Bill Gates is, I'm sure you're waiting like I am for the check from Bill Gates for whatever amount of money.
Well, that's right behind the 37 million that the Nigerian guy has for me.
Right, the Nigerian prince. Right, amazingly, yes, right, amazing. So here's the first thing that is always amazing to me, and you see this in politics more than anything. People believe stuff written on the internet that they would never believe if you stood in front of them face to face and said it to them. So you stood in front of them face to face, they'd say, "No way!" But on the internet, they believe it. It's amazing.
One of my favorite memes is with Abraham Lincoln, and it's like, it's purporting for him to have said something in that moment. Man's been dead since 150 years, 200 years, and all of a sudden, bam, here it is. So, you're right.
But here are the practical rules of thumb. So the first practical rule of thumb is, okay, your things that institutions you deal with, banks, credit card companies, that they have passwords and stuff. They're not reaching out to you, encouraging you to do things like reset passwords, or that's not. They don't do that. In fact,
and the IRS, same thing with the IRS.
Same thing with the government. If you're being asked to do something, rule number one, if you're being asked to do something that requires you to type in or give up personal information, passwords, social security numbers, anything, that's a red flag to say stop. And okay, don't send an email to verify it. You know why? Because chances are you're sending an email to the bad guy.
Right.
See, everyone has one of these. You all have one of these, right? See this thing? This thing is actually a telephone. It works. You can actually call people on it. So you know what? If you think for a minute, that looks weird. Call the company. Call them and say, I got this weird email. I promise you that they're going to say, we did not send that.
On the subject, if I could add one other thing, you said the IRS. If the IRS does not tell you, they are auditing you. So if you
right.
do it,
actually,
when they show up at your door.
Right. No, but I have received legitimate correspondence in the mail from the IRS. And there's a difference between getting a hard letter in the mail and an email, click on this link. There's a big difference there.
Or an email that says, if you don't pay us what you owe us, we're going to audit you. That's not how they do this.
Second rule of thumb. If you don't know for sure who sent it, even if you do, don't click on links you don't know. And if they look even a little suspicious, don't click on them, because chances are, if you do, you have just installed in your computer spyware, malware, viruses, things you do not want in your computer. You may have just let a ransomer into your computer to take over your data. And people,
And just, you know, just a little point of interest. It's not something that can be cleared up with a quick penicillin shot. It's going to be a lot more painful, time-consuming, and expensive.
It's super. I compare it to vampires. Most of these things, they're like vampires. They can't get into your computer unless you let them in. Vampire, remember the myth. They can't come in your house unless you invite them in. So don't invite these things in. If I get an email or a link from someplace I don't know, I don't care if it's from Michael. If I get a text message that comes from Michael Haber and it has all these numbers and letters and things and weird symbols on it, and it's a link, I'll just, like you said, I call Michael and say, hey, Mike, did you send me this?
It's a shame, Ed. You just missed that 12 million I was going to send you.
Damn it. And I needed it.
Hey, right behind Bill Gates, right behind the money Bill Gates, and the Nigerian prince is still sending. But unfortunately, a lot of these people are, you know, they prey on the vulnerable. And so, you know, one of the big scams that you probably have heard of is the grandchild scam. I don't know if you've heard this one. This is very sad. So an elderly couple gets a call at home at night, 10 at night, 11 at night, usually wakes them up because they're elderly. Grandma, oh my God, I'm in such trouble. And you know, the first thing they'll say, oh, is that you, Mark? Yeah, it's Mark. Grandma, please, you can't call my parents. I'm in such trouble. I'm in jail. You got to send me bail money to bail me out. And 9 times out of 10, these people are sending a couple $1,000. And unfortunately, we live as, listen, if you go on the street and you talk to people, one of the scary things is, and you might want people not to vote after you talk to enough of them, is there are a lot of very gullible people out there, you know, and they will. I mean, and law firms have fallen for some of the scams. One of my favorites is the help us collect on a debt and take your fee out scam. I don't know if you've heard this one. Oh, it's great. They say, we've got this check, but it has to go through a U.S. bank. It's for, you know, $120,000. If you let us, you know, if you take care of it first, you can take your 10% fee out. So you deposit the check, take your fee out, but you got to wire us money. You wire them the money, and guess what happens to the check within a couple hours of the wire going? It bounces like a rubber ball, and
actually, now you bring that up. I actually had a client years ago who called me on that, and I had to learn a little bit about a banking industry. And the banks, when you submit a wire transfer, even though they approve or they admit or show that the wire transfer went through, they still have up to 24 hours to reject the wire transfer. So if you do the wire transfer, what the scammers do is they call you almost immediately after and say, oh my God, or in this case, Mark, what you're saying, send me money. In my case, my client sold somebody a truck for $50,000 and they wire transferred my client $150,000. Then called them immediately and said, hey, we made a mistake. We sent us back $100. Send us back $100. And he immediately sent it back and then found out the next day that he didn't have the 50 that they gave him or the 100 that he just sent them. So you can't. You gotta be real.
Well, I guess to dovetail on to sum up what a little rule of thumb / pro tip based on what you just said. You know, another one would be if it looks too good to be true, it's probably not true.
Right. Now there is another corollary to that, and that is what you're starting to talk about, which are rights of publicity or rights of likeness. So the right to use your image, your voice, your name, and you know, for most of us. Look, there's all kinds of there's revenge porn schemes, there's things like that out there, but the right of publicity issues, which we do deal with some, those are really more for the famous people because most people don't really care about Mark Stein's name or Mark Stein's image. But if you're LeBron James, they care about your name and image. There was a very famous trademark case many years ago where I think he was in the AC business when Michael Jordan was playing for the Bulls. There was a guy named Michael Jordan who lived in Illinois. That was his name, only he never used the name in his business until Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan, and then all of a sudden he changed his name, and they went after him, and he said, well, wait, it's my name, and they said, well, problem here is you're not using it because it's your name, you're using it to ride on the coattails and trade on the goodwill of this other guy, and sure enough he was, and they shut him down. They were like, you can call it, you can have your name in it, but you can't call it like Michael Jordan's as if he's somehow part of the AC company or endorsing your AC company.
Michael Jordan's
could he have called it the Anglo-Saxon Michael Jordan company or something like that? Could he have called it, you know, there is short, fat, bald Michael Jordan company? I mean,
there is a concept of fair use in both trademark and copyright that says you can tell the public what you're doing. So, the simplest example, if you're a used car lot and you sell Ford Mustangs, you can say, I sell Ford Mustangs. What you can't do is you can't put a Mustang emblem up to make it look like Ford someone endorses you or sponsors you.
So that's kind of like, it reminds me of the crime called personating a law enforcement officer. And actually it's called personating, not impersonating. But personating a law enforcement officer basically has two elements. One, you have to hold yourself out in some way to appear to the public as if you're a cop, right? Maybe you're wearing a law enforcement t-shirt or a law enforcement hat or whatever. But then it requires that you do something above and beyond just that to act as if you are that person. So I can wear my, Miami-Dade Police Department t-shirt, my, City of Miami Beach Police Department t-shirt. That's not a crime. But if I try to pull somebody over, or if I tell somebody, stop, I want to talk to you, if I take some act in furtherance of it, now I've stepped across that line and I'm actually pretending to be that which I'm not. So I guess that's kind of like what you were talking about with the Michael Jordan thing.
So in my world, it's mostly about money. So where you get into trouble with being outside of fair use is when you're using, as Michael, as you know, because we've been down this road.
We're going to talk about that.
If you're using whatever it is that's not yours to make money, you're usually outside of fair use because, listen, if you taught Sunday school and you went in and you taught the class with it, you're probably okay. But if you're trying to make shekels with it, well, now you probably got a problem.
So let's talk a little bit about that, about fair use, because now we're talking about when you appropriate somebody else's intellectual property, right? Like, let's say I want to use a photograph that somebody else owns or created, or what have you, downloading music, pirating television shows or movies. There are exceptions that make that legitimate, correct? Where you don't need to be licensed.
Yes, but great lawyer answer. So, all right, so
Mark, I've tried that one on my fiance though. It doesn't work. That lawyer is gonna have to do it.
Yeah, because she's a lawyer too.
And she's smarter than me, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, she doesn't let me get away with that one.
Yeah, doesn't work. Doesn't work in the marriage realm. But here's the reality. So look, and here's sort of practical tip number whatever. And this is also a strange phenomenon of the internet. So nobody would walk into Publix, take a product off the store shelf, and walk out without paying for it and think that's okay. Like, there's no one out there that'd be that's okay.
Well, except it is okay in certain parts of this country.
Well, okay if you're in Oregon and in San Francisco.
Okay.
It's still you really needed it and you don't have the money.
Right. Okay. But apart from criminal behavior that may not be prosecuted, but for some reason people think you can go onto the internet, take something that is not yours, you didn't make it, and use it as if it were your own. And then you're appalled when somebody approaches you and says, you didn't pay me for that. And I always say to people, like, I mean, do you go into Walgreens and just take stuff and walk out with it and expect it's going to be okay? It's really the same thing.
Only when I'm sleepwalking.
It's really the same thing. I mean, look, and there's actually, in my world, one of the groups that has actually had the most financial success the last 5 to 10 years have been photographers. So there, now digital photography, you can embed images, you can put watermarks inside of digital photographs that are very easy to track now. There's really good web crawlers and spiders that'll go out and find the digital image inside, the digital mark inside the image. So photographers are making a fortune going after people and sending, as Michael Haber knows, sending these nasty letters. And it's a volume business. They're sending thousands of letters. But the reality is you use an image, and people get into this all the time, problems in this on their websites, lawyers, non-lawyers. If you use an image and it's not yours, that's copyright infringement. Hate to break it to you.
And it doesn't matter really what the purpose that you're using it for, correct?
Well, no, that's the exception. So here's the exception. So
this is where we get into fair use.
So if I put it up on my firm website, which is clearly for the purposes of making money, of me generating business, then it's probably not fair use because I'm using it for a commercial purpose. I can't say I'm not using it for commercial purpose. Now, if on the other hand, I'm a professor and I put it up, as part of my law school class solely for the purposes of teaching the kids, or I put it up because I'm a social commentator and I think this sucks and I want to criticize it. Those sorts of things, criticism, education, where I'm clearly not trying to make money, those are potential exceptions to copyright infringement. And those can be in the copyright context, and we'll talk about the trademark context because it's a little different. Those are examples of fair use of copyright. And remember, copyright, just kind of the first question you guys asked. So copyright covers, here, this is one of my favorite legal definitions, so I'll say it because it's great. So copyright covers any original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression. Isn't that beautiful? That's such a
lawyer speak.
Right.
I love it.
So what it means is anything you can think of, anything that comes out of your head that you can put in some permanent form. So that means a greeting card, a computer program, a novel, a piece of art, a photograph. And by the way, it can be crap. Doesn't have to be good. Quality is not at issue here. It can also be pornographic. This is not.
That makes me feel really good because I am an aspiring author and most of what I write is crap. But I'm glad to know
it's yours.
It's protected, even though it's crap. Okay,
it's yours. Nobody can take it. It's yours.
So to bring this home and give a real world example, several years ago I started a blog, and every day during the week I would post a different blog article that was based on a current news event. So I would find some bizarre criminal related story from wherever. It didn't even have to be a United States-based story. It just had to be interesting and give me enough literary license to make something entertaining yet informative out of the topic. And I would always find my article and then fact check it to make sure it was an actual article, not like a Babylon Bee or Onion type thing. And once I had several sources, I'd read what I could read, and then I would link to one of those articles in my blog post. But as I wrote my blog post, I would separate each paragraph with an image, usually an image that I took right from the article that I was citing to. Other times I would find other images that were relevant and hopefully, entertaining. It was always, entertainment was always kind of the thing, but also for content and information. So I did that for about 5 years. I had about 1,500 of those things on my blog. And all of a sudden I get a letter from some law firm telling me, that I've misappropriated the image and I have to pay them X or they're going to sue me in federal court. And naturally, being a lawyer, I looked at this and said, holy shit, I'd better call a fucking lawyer. And so I got on the phone with Mark. And I sent over the information and I said, here's the situation. This is what I got. And, what do we do? And
well, okay. So what you do, you have two choices. So one, it depends, and it depends on how risk adverse you are as to which of these you choose. So if you're not risk adverse and you kind of want to gamble a little, you can just ignore them because these are churn and burn factories. They're sending out thousands, if not tens of thousands. There's a 3-year statute of limitation in copyright, and they're constantly bringing new lawyers in to do these. Chances are they'll blow the statute of limitations because they're looking to collect. They're not looking for a lawsuit. Now, the flip side of that,
industry.
Right. The flip side of that is if you were more risk adverse, you call them, you don't want the lawyer involved. So let's say they call, and these letters, people get these letters all the time. So let's say they always start at a pretty reasonable number. Let's say they start you at $2,500. I'm willing to bet you that you could whittle them down to somewhere between $100 and $500 if you call them up and you just right away haggle with them. And I've even had bets with friends who are non-lawyers to see how low they could get it. In fact, I bet a friend who bought me a bottle of scotch as a result of it that he could get it down to a number he couldn't believe it. He did. Because all they want money. And the earlier on they get it, the better it is for them because these are all contingency matters. So, they get $1,000 out of it or $500 out of it. They're getting a third of it. They just want to move on to the next one.
Let me give an interesting parallel. Here in Florida, and other states have it as well, but here in Florida, we have a statute that authorizes a retailer to serve you with a civil demand letter requesting a $200 payment, minimum $200 payment for any act of retail theft. I mean, even if you took a dollar candy bar, whether you get arrested or you don't get arrested, prosecuted or not prosecuted, this is a completely independent civil action that the retailer is entitled to take. So I get this regularly where people get these civil demand letters and they want to know, well, should I pay it? And so, like your advice, I say to them, this is a personal decision, because right now you're being put on notice about a potential lawsuit that has not yet been filed, may never be filed. And if it does get filed, it's going to cost them money and time to file it. And so they're going to be throwing away good money potentially against bad. They have no idea whether you're collectible or how difficult it will be to collect, or whether they'll get a judgment, or how much time, effort, or energy they'll have to put into getting that judgment, right? So it's a cost benefit on that. But the stakes are lower. In our case, in this case, when we're talking about the infringement on your end, what are the stakes? Because number one, we're not talking about a small claims court in state court, a small claims case in state court. We're talking about a federal district court lawsuit. So tell us a little about that.
Well, okay. So, copyright is a little dangerous. And copyright is probably the most dangerous for a few reasons. One, there are prevailing party attorney's fees to win a copyright case. There's some formalities you have to comply with, but if you comply with them, they're very easy. You can get prevailing party attorney's fees, and they're awarded in copyright cases. So that's a risk. The second thing about copyright cases is copyright cases are a little counterintuitive. So, you need permission from either the creator or whoever has rights in whatever you're using. And that it could be a song. And the licenses are easy to secure in a lot of areas. Like the easiest example is, there's all these music licensing companies that license music if you want to play it in your waiting room or your bar or your restaurant. And the licenses are cheap. So getting them is easy. But copyright is a little counterintuitive because people tend to look at it and think, well, I can use it because it's out there. And again, the internet is the worst culprit of this, because people find it, oh, that's a stock image, or, oh, I'm just putting, 10 seconds of the song on my website, or, oh, and look, issues like how much of the work are you using are issues that go to whether it's an exception to fair use. But here's the simple rule of thumb. We're going to go back to one other practical chip in the example we're talking about. But here's the other rule of thumb, and this is a fairly simple rule. If it ain't yours, don't use it unless you get permission. I mean, it's not that hard. And if it's yours. Did you make it? It's not your photograph. Don't use it if you don't get permission in some way.
So let me ask you a real world situation, something I used to do on a radio show I had. It came up as a goof. We used to come back from commercial break and we would play just like 10 or 15 seconds of a song, a popular song, not a one that we created. So we'd play an Eagles song or Aerosmith or whatever. And then we'd go into the show. And the first time we did it, or the second time we did it, I knew the song. And my co-host was making fun of me that I'm old. It was from the 60s or whatever. And so I jokingly said, look, if it's from the 70s or the 80s, I probably know the song and who sang it. And so it started becoming a bit. When we come back from the show, we would play a bit of the song, a little bit of the song, and then I would have to try and guess it.
But wait a minute, Ed, you also did, but when you did that, you also played, you had introductory music that you were using just to introduce that segment.
Yeah, well, that's another
song to introduce. So it was a double entendre.
Well, but that's another issue that I think we were copywriting infringement there for sure. I'm pretty sure we were doing copyright infringement there, because I had an intro song for my show, and it was a song, somebody's other song. It was actually an Isley Brothers song. And I realized that might have been a problem because we played that for a long period of time. But what I'm asking, Mark, is I was told that if it's under 10 seconds or 20 seconds or something of that nature, it's not a copyright infringement. But I never really looked into it because I figured, screw it. If they sue me, I'll deal with it when it happens. But it was while I really didn't generate any money, because I really wasn't generating money on that show, it was for entertainment value as part of the show. So the question then becomes, and I think it's probably going to be an easy answer for you by the way you're looking at me, but is there was I violating a copyright, was I committing copyright infringement, and what could I do to get around it or not?
So, so fair use is a very factual, intensive inquiry, but one of the elements of fair use is the question of how much of the work are you using, and it's not so much the length of time, but for instance, is it something really well known or distinguishable? Like, if it's the chorus of Hotel California, a lot more people are going to know that than some midpoint in the song that people may not recognize. Okay. So, it's difficult to answer yes or no, but typically if you're using a very small segment of something, you're in a much better, stronger position to say this is not infringement. And typically if you are not using it for a commercial, for a money-making purpose, you're in a much stronger position to say this is fair use. Companies that, realize that for like industries like the music industry or the film industry, they're selective in who they go after, because think of how many millions and millions of examples like you gave happen every week all over this country.
Well, then I think I was safe because my board op always tried to pick songs that were not popular. So for example, he used to try and play 2 or 3 Yoko Ono songs. Pretty sure Yoko Ono can't sue anybody for copyright infringement, because I don't know too many people who listen to Yoko Ono.
Well, but she's got a very distinctive cat yowl. So,
distinctive
I think
is one way I would describe it.
Yeah, she may have some extra protection.
One thing quickly. So fair use of trademark is a little different. And the example I used before, which is fair use of trademark, is you're allowed to tell the public what you do. I sell Ford Mustangs, but you can't just use the emblem, because using the emblem suggests some kind of sponsorship, affiliation, connection. And that's the no really in trademark fair use, is if you're using it in some way that suggests that the trademark owner is endorsing your business or you're connected with them, then you're probably in a position where they're going to come and smack you.
Let me shift gears for a second, because I want to make sure people understand that a lot of what we're talking about, almost all of what we're talking about right now, falls into the civil realm, right?
Yes.
This is all dealing with money. It's not dealing with Ed's going to jail because he used a Carpenter's tune, 25 seconds of a Carpenter's tune on his radio show.
No,
I'm not going to jail. I'm not going to jail because I republish somebody's image from a news article. Here we're strictly talking about the aggravation and the hassle of being hounded by debt collectors and lawyers and possibly sued and either settling or litigating or what have you. But there is a criminal component to this, and there's a confluence of intellectual property law and both state law and federal law. And let's just start with the federal end and talk about briefly. I mean, we don't have to get into any really heavy kind of detail, but I do want people to understand counterfeit trademarking and labeling, criminal copyright infringement, criminal theft of trade secrets, wire fraud, mail fraud, human trafficking, child pornography, smuggling, various financial crimes, identity thefts, even terrorism. All of these things are federal criminal acts that dovetail to some degree or another with intellectual property, or can anyhow.
Right. So like on the trademark side, what you're really talking about is counterfeiting. And anyone who's walked through Canal Street in New York has seen Rolex watches available for $20 and Cartier purses available for $30, and obviously.
And the guy sitting on the genie carpet with 200 DVDs lined up of the movies that are still in the theaters. Of course, they all have subtitles because they're spoken in whatever language they speak in the Philippines.
Well, you also sometimes in those you get people standing up and blocking the screen for a little while because they were filmed. Someone's crying.
Actually, it's funny, Mark, that you say that, because there was actually in my research, I found a thing called camcording, which is an actual term, because back in the day, I mean, I don't think it's as prevalent now, or maybe it is even more so with cell phones. But they created this offense called camcording because when camcorders first came out, people would sit in the movie theater with their camcorder and literally record the movie.
Oh yeah. No, you got to understand. So technology as technology develops, and look, law. I mean, Congress is way behind. Like, I mean, they always are.
Imagine that.
Right? Imagine that. They always are.
The government not being up to speed with the rest of the world.
But so the answer to your question is, so let's take
Congress only followed the science. I mean, the technology.
But okay, so I'll give you a great example of that really quickly. So in 1976, there was a major rewrite of the Copyright Act. Okay, 1976, and we're all old enough to remember 1976. I got bar mitzvahed in 1976. All right, so 4 years later, the compact disc got created. Now, if in 1975, when Congress was debating the revisions to the Copyright Act, if you stood up in Congress and you said, no, you guys got to deal with this. There's going to be, in a couple of years, there's going to be these little tiny diskettes, and they're going to spin really fast, and lasers are going to shoot on them and play all this music and content. You would have been put in a straitjacket. But sure enough, 4 years later, and it created a whole new area of counterfeiting that didn't get fixed for like a decade and a half because Congress is behind. So, for like 15 years. So trademark counterfeiting is the first and easiest one. And, look, we started with an example of trademark counterfeiting. The fake heart valve, which is put in a package that it looks just like the real McCoy, so much so that it went through a wholesaler into the hospital distribution chain, the hospital people that acquire it, they bought it, they inventoried it, they looked at the package, they put it on the shelf because it looked like all the other ones, having no idea. So trademark counterfeiting is criminal. And this area of the law.
Let me say one thing to that, because I have my notes in front of me on trademark counterfeiting. And the Trademark Counterfeiting Act, there's actually a federal act called the Trademark Counterfeiting Act, which is found at 18 USC 2320. And basically that makes it a federal crime with penalties up to 10 years imprisonment and a $2 million fine if you intentionally traffic in goods or services knowingly using a counterfeit mark on or connection with such goods or services. So that's pretty hefty, 10 years and $2 million. And it doesn't have to be something as deadly as a heart valve, right? No. I mean, it could be something completely innocuous.
Fake Rolex watches. Fake Cartier handbags. I mean, fake luxury goods tend to get hit the hardest. But see, here's the issue. You got to interest the U.S. attorney typically in these things, and getting a U.S. attorney interested in one of these cases, it better be big and get them on the front page of the paper. These assistant U.S. attorneys are walking by all of these street vendors on Canal Street every single day. I mean, it's not like they don't know it exists. It's happening right under their nose and very blatantly. Right, but don't forget three things. First of all, whoever's running the Justice Department is really driving what they're doing. So it might be a low priority. I mean, listen, after 9/11, nobody was ever going to look at this stuff. Everyone was focused on terrorism. That was the focus. And look, you guys were criminal lawyers down here. In the 80s and into the 90s, the U.S. Attorney's Office of Southern District of Florida, if it wasn't drugs, they weren't talking about it, man. It was all about drug violence and drugs. And for a little while it was corrupt judges, but most of it was drugs. So getting the U.S. attorney to take a counterfeiting case in those years was next to impossible. So that's the first issue. The second issue you have is it's got to be worthwhile in volume. Because you go and bust the guy. So I've done this before with marshals. So you get and you pay them overtime. They love it because they get paid time and a half. But you bring 4 marshals into some place and they literally come in, vests on, guns, and you find 100 Rolex watches. First of all, the amount of money you just paid to get the ex parte seizure order you just spent $50,000 or $100,000 and you got 50 watches. Now, the flip side of that is you do it and you get 500,000 watches. Everyone's all excited. And guess what? The U.S. attorney is now really interested in it because now it's front page news. We shut down a counterfeiting operation. So that's the second issue, is a pure economic issue. And then the third issue is a volume issue. So, if you were a big company like Rolex or Cartier or any of these, you got to be selective. There's only so many of these you can afford to do under your legal budget. So you really work them up. You hire private investigators to really look at these things. and you know, where you really try and use your time and money, you love repeat offenders. Like you love those guys because chances are you can really get criminal charges brought against them. And you love it if you can tie them to something outside the U.S., especially links to crime, links to terrorism, because then the U.S. attorney might say, I'll take that.
What about theft of trade secrets? That's another big area, no?
Very hard to induce criminal interest in it. And most of that is state court. So there is a Federal Trade Secrets Act, but most trade secret cases are creatures of state law. So now I was successful some years ago in interesting, there's most states also have counterfeiting statutes on the state level. So many years ago, a client and I convinced the Hialeah Police Department to help us do a raid of a factory, a warehouse in Hialeah. And under the state of Florida trademark counterfeiting statute, you can seize any of the means of production. So when we hit this warehouse, they had all this equipment in use, which they seized. And the city of Hialeah Police Department was able to sell the equipment, or our client was able to sell it. And our client cut a nice check. I think the softball team was covered for the next 10 years with uniforms, bats, balls, gloves. They loved us. They were like, you got another one for us? But those are few and far between.
I was reading about the Economic Espionage Act, and that deals with theft of trade secrets for the benefits of foreign government, which is obviously more serious than if you do it for personal use. But either way, I mean, it's still, if you do it for foreign governments, you're talking about $5 million in fines and 15 years imprisonment. And if you do it for yourself personally, 10 years imprisonment and $250,000 fine.
So remember, cyber crime right now is huge, and you know you're reading about it at every level every day, and it takes on a lot of different forms. So cybersecurity, they're now lawyers, and I know quite a few of them that literally their entire practice is cybersecurity. They're now lawyers that literally blockchain and cryptocurrency is their entire practice. So we deal some with governmental authorities. I mean, Justice has a computer crimes division that's very active all over the country, especially in places like South Florida, California, New York.
Just so the people are aware, the FBI has a active website called I, as in the letter I, and C, like internet crime, IC, and then the number 3. So it's www.ic3.gov. And that is a link where you can report any type of cyber crime, identity theft, mortgage fraud, whatever it may be, anything that has to do with electronic criminal acts, you can report to www.ic3.gov.
And one of the problems is it's much like data privacy right now. So let's say you're paranoid and you think that the government's spying on you every minute. Well, there's 300 million people live in America. So if the government's spying on 300 million people every minute, just think of the amount that you do on the internet yourself and multiply that out by all the tens and hundreds of millions of people. I mean, the volume of data you have to sift through is enormous. So, all the enforcement agencies rely very heavily on artificial intelligence. And, tips, that FBI link, they get literally tens of thousands of tips a week. And there's only so many FBI agents attached to it, and there's only so many things they can investigate.
So I can tell you from personal experience, having had my identity usurped dozens and dozens of times, and on at least 2 occasions
it's the beard, Michael.
Where there was actual financial loss. I actually have 2 people who were scammed by fake profiles on social media and actually gave money to somebody. And I was contacted by family members who later discovered it and obviously tried to assist them in, reporting it to local law enforcement and also to IC3. And even with tangible damages, I've never had the FBI or IC3 even show me the courtesy of a reply. Now, I did get one not too long ago where somebody in Europe sent me photographs of what purported to be a passport with my image, and obviously it wasn't my passport. The number on it was different, everything. I mean, I literally had to pull out my passport and check the picture. It's a different photograph, but clearly it's a photograph of me. And I mean, this is as clean a U.S. passport as you're ever going to see. And at that one, I reached out to Customs. And I called up and I said, listen, somebody sent this to me. Normally I wouldn't bother you guys, but this is a passport, blah, blah. And the response I got from them was, okay, but do you have the actual passport, sir? I said, no, I just got a picture somebody from Europe sent me. They said, all right, well, you know what that's worth? Nothing. Zero. So again, the fact that someone did it is offensive and potentially dangerous. Think about it from this perspective. Here's another good. What about this? Would this fall into IP? These phony vaccination certificates, right? Because now you can buy them in bulk. You can just hop on the internet and buy your own little vaccination card, fill it in yourself, and present it as pull an Aaron Rodgers. Here I am, I'm vaccinated. Where would that fall on this spectrum?
I think we need to call Joe Rogan and get his medical advice on this. So
yeah, right.
Well, listen, I don't care the reason anyone does it. I'm not, going into the methods and sources.
I'll tell you where it could have fallen on the spectrum. If Biden is in office, you're going to have the DOJ knocking on your door in 5 minutes. If it's a Republican that's in office, they'll be like, yeah, whatever.
No, it won't. Either way, it won't matter, because the problem is one of resources. And just from a resource management standpoint, it's just the volume's too great. Right. So you're only going to shut it down. When you'll shut it down, when one of three things happens. One, people get hurt. People get hurt, then there's an outcry, then you shut it down. Two, when it starts costing people money, you get people screaming and yelling, and then they'll do something about it. And then the third time they'll do something about it is if it achieves, and this goes to the assistant U.S. attorneys around the country, because most of them, as we know, they're in those positions because they want to be in a higher position. If it gets you good pub, if it's going to get you that judgeship you want, or get you on that publicity for the run at whatever office you want, then you're going to do it. And I hate to be cynical, but that's really the reality of it. Remember, they're just so much volume that's going on. And don't forget, look, in your guys' world, you don't do discovery the way the civil lawyers do. So discovery has gotten exponentially harder since, electronically stored information, because, now you get an email. We send each other an email message, and Michael, your brother's on it, your sister-in-law's on it. All of a sudden there are 10 people on it. Now everyone's replying. All of a sudden one email is like 60 emails. And it's even hard to separate out who's who. And that's what's happening with some of these issues, some of these complaints. It exponentially increases. Look, that's the danger. I mean, think about it when we were young. Okay, so you listened to an album that you wanted to share with me. So you took the record, you hooked it up to your tape machine, you made me a tape, you gave me the tape. We had to physically be in the same place. It's one tape. Yeah, now take that to today. Now with one click of the mouse, you can send that album to tens of millions of people all over the world in literally seconds.
Right.
So
that kind of dovetails. That kind of goes into the last topic I want to get to. I don't mean to cut you off, but we're running short on time. The last topic I wanted to get to was the state type crimes, right? Because we talked a little bit about the federal issues, but there's also all sorts of state law issues like stalking, harassment, cyber stalking, video voyeurism, revenge porn. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and it kind of dovetails with the sharing of images, right? And revenge porn, I guess, is the easiest one for us to deal with, because those are consensual images. And so if Ed and his fiance,
sometimes
if Ed and his fiance are into taking risque pictures of one another and sharing them, that's their business. They're perfectly entitled to do it.
Why are you judging me, man? Why are you judging me?
God help her when she has to see his images. But what if she has the poor taste to post his images on the internet? And then we all have to see that. It's like an image that you can never get out of your mind. Once seen, it can never be unseen. You can be traumatized for life from some of this stuff. But so we have criminal law against that, right? You're allowed to share risque photographs, but what you're not permitted to do is to take that image that you lawfully own. I mean, that is your image. Once it's given to you and shared to you, it's yours. But you do not have the right to share that with the public, because it crosses a certain line, right? We've said we're not going to allow this. The only purpose of it, there's no legitimate purpose for it. It's there for harassment, for bullying, for
it's there to hurt. It's there to harm. That's what it's there for. In some ways, to harm the other person. So, you know, so look, you know, those sorts of things are much easier. So now you're trying to convince a state attorney. And, you know, especially like, so take revenge porn where it's a man doing something revengeful to a woman. So now with Me Too and all the other things going on, it's a much easier sell at the local level to say, do something about this than it is to sell at the national level, especially if something horrible happens. I mean, you know, there have been these terrible national incidents of especially high school girls committing suicide and, you know, just these terrible things. So that, you know, those sorts of things, look, typically so there's two approaches to it. The first approach is, and this happened, Michael, I don't know if you remember this. So Ed, we have, there's someone we grew up with, the Michael remembers well, a guy named Nevin Shapiro, who I think is now out of prison, who was a big fraudster, turned out to be a big Ponzi scheme. But Nevin was a huge booster. And when the story broke on Yahoo Sports, one of the there were like 10 images right in the front, and one of the featured images is an image of Nevin Shapiro with Willis McGahee. And I remember, Paul remembered when this image was taken. Paul's one of my brothers, Ed. And on the other side of Willis McGahee, when she's about 13 years old, is my niece, Rachel. And it was a picture taken at a banquet that Nevin just happened to be in, but it's now front and center Yahoo Sports lead story. And at the time this broke, she's in college. Her friends thought it was great, but Paul called me up freaking out. So I called the lawyer for Yahoo Sports, because this is the civil side of it. And I said, there'll be a lawsuit on file by 5 o'clock if you don't get it down. So he said, and I explained him the situation. So he calls me back an hour later and he goes, okay. He goes, look, this is the best I can do. And if you want to fight, then we're going to have to. He goes, I will take it down within the next 20 minutes on everything that Yahoo owns and controls. What I can't do, because this thing went viral, this was a huge, it's sort of like the old adage of, you know, when you speak badly about someone, you know, rip the pillow open and let all the feathers go to the wind and now collect all the feathers. He said, what I can't do is I can't get it down from all these third-party sites. And if you want us to do that, you're going to have to fight us on it. And of course, the law doesn't obligate them to do that because it's out there. It's not, you can't pull it back in. So we did get it down from all the Yahoo stuff very quickly, but it's all over. You can still find it all over the internet. And it's clearly her. I mean, there's no ambiguity. It's her. It's actually a good picture of her. And you know, she's like 14 years old.
I have to assume that at least she was fully clothed. Yes.
She was fully clothed. It's only her face, but it happened to be one of the lead images, probably because it was a clear image. And yeah, so I think, by the way, I think Nevin got out of prison, so he's getting out.
So listen, Mark, I really appreciate it. We could go on forever. This is a fascinating subject, and there's so much to discuss. But I unfortunately we're pretty much approaching the end here. And so I just want to thank you for your time and for your knowledge and sharing your expertise with the folks. It's really been fascinating and interesting.
It's my pleasure. So
Martinez.
What am I doing? Nothing. I was actually going to tell Mark that I'm actually going to call him if you have a few minutes after the show.
Yeah, today no good, but call me Wednesday.
Okay, I will call you Wednesday. I might have a case for you. We'll talk.
So two quick final things though, just so that people keep in mind. Number one, look, and it seems lost in society right now, but exercise some common sense. If you wouldn't do it in the brick and mortar world, you can't do it in the internet world. Like if you can't do it in the digital world, you can't do it in the brick and mortar world. And then the second thing is, come on, don't believe everything you read. I mean, if it sounds absurd, you know what? It probably is. No, you're not getting a check from Bill Gates. I hate to break it to you. So,
common sense advice from an exceptionally smart guy. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Ed, thank you as always for participating. And folks, thank you as always for listening. This has been episode 20. Next week, we'll be back with episode 21. I don't know that we'll top 20. We will numerically, but we'll try to do as good as we can with content. Mark, hopefully you'll come back and join us again for a follow-up session at some point.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure.
All right, guys. Have a great afternoon. Thank everybody.
Bye-bye.